At the heart of Willesden High School, a secret lurks in the shadows. Join us as we uncover the mystery of descendants of witches as Olivia's world falls apart, and the lines between reality and nightmare blur. What is real and what is the work of evil? Let's find out. Here is Descendants of Witches EP16. Thank you for your likes and subscriptions. Hope to see your comments in the comment section. 2. 32 William II. Having a witch mother makes for quite an interesting life, King William Stevenson II said, eyeing his mother slyly. He grabbed an apple slice from his beige satchel and popped it in his mouth, chewing mischievously. His witch mother shot him a glowering look from beside him. From where the king stood, she looked like a painting, and the frames of the wooden trees encased her to one secluded spot. The sparse leaves and withering trees danced from side to side in the background, staring hauntingly at whoever dared make eye contact. Charcoal clouds chased them from above as they scampered through the dark forest, and the sun began to set. The gray forest blended with her black dress and obsidian hair that was tied back, which created a scene that was quite an interesting portrait to look at. I suppose it is what one expects, King William II mused, staring up at the gloomy gray sky out of habit. When he realized that there were no fresco paintings above, he craned his neck to meet the witch's gaze. Keeping it a secret makes it all the more amusing. Does it not, witch? He asked in a taunting teenager way. His behavior was unusual because he was no teener. He was 100 years old. The witch did not respond. Instead, her glare deepened. She began stroking her slender fingers against the black book that was in her satchel, in an attempt to calm herself. The king recalled the witch reading from it when he was a mere boy. It seemed to be an item that soothed the witch when the cunning king did something sneaky. The stories within sure as hell relieved King William II from his stressful duties during boyhood until now. The most hilarious thing occurred yesterday. At those bi-weekly church meetings, William II suddenly recalled as leaves crunched underfoot. As the royal king of Willesden, I must have close relations with the church. However, all those wizened cardinals and chaplains could talk about was the Inquisition. They continue to add fuel to the witch craze by proposing their, must I say, gruesome ideals. Do you know what my reaction was? Nodding solemnly. William II bellowed, laughing at his own story as if he responded extravagantly. Do you see the irony, witch? Do you? The witch tilted her head sideways, scrutinizing her son that picked up absolutely none of her features. Ah yes. The irony is that you secretly have a witch mother. However, you must abide by the church's proposal of purging my sisters, for you are royalty, she replied sardonically. What an excellent son you are. King William II forcibly laughed at the witch's response, masking the intimidation she made him feel. Do not get too hasty, mother. It is like you told me, there are no other witches except for you, William II said, sweeping some low branches that blocked their route. That does not change the fact that my pagan sisters are being wrongly accused and unjustly imprisoned. I am the single breathing pagan witch, yet the witch hunters have not caught me, although they claim to have. Says something about those men, does it not? The witch remarked as her taut violet eyes pierced the king. Their eagerness to hang innocent women and justify their actions by claiming they are witches will catch up to them. I will make sure of it. William II had been staring up at the gray sky during her speech, lost in his world. I suppose since you are the only witch, it makes you special just like me. He ignorantly quipped, dismissing her response. As usual, his witch mother turned his playful banter into a serious lecture. I am not special, William Stevenson II. You are, as I am sure you know by now. You are not a child anymore, and in only 6 hours, you will embark on your journey. Understand? Or would you like me to repeat myself? She firmly asked. He truly did not want the witch to bore him any longer with the same story, although he had to admit, the way she worded his specialness excited him every time. It made him feel like he had a purpose and a meaning to his life. Nevertheless, at times like this, he would rather not have his witch mother lecture him. No, witch. I understand my lifelong duty. What in God's name is happening to the church? The witch suddenly roared, looking straight ahead with flared eyes. This explosion by the witch caught the king off guard, as she was usually monotonous and serious. Curious and slightly frightened, William II turned to look at what enraged his mother. Once his emerald eyes landed on the sight, his jaw instantly dropped to the forest floor. Past the forest was a grassy field where the crutch of Willesden once stood. A couple of knights and loads of common people were hustling around it and smashing it into pieces. The once ivory and intact bricks were now smeared with dirt, as half of God's sanctuary had been obliterated. Every time a fallen brick clattered to the ground, a cloud of dust would blow in the wind. The stained glass had been neatly removed and placed to the side, but that did not change the fact that these pristine artifacts were being thrown away. William II watched with horrid eyes as the men climbed up the church and hammered at the glorious spire. He couldn't care less about respecting God's chapel. He was more enraged over the fact that his church was being torn into pieces, without his approval or his knowledge. What in God's name is happening to the church? King William II roared, smacking the green shrubs out of anger. There was no mention of this during our church meeting yesterday. I swear if it turns out that this is all the cardinal's doing, I will have him severely punished. The witch gritted her teeth as she peered at the scene. How will you fulfill your duty without the church? She yelled, frustrated with the humans and their incomprehensible minds. King William II widened his eyes, realizing she had a point. How would he fulfill his duties without the church? Today was the special day he had been looking forward to for 100 years. Was it all going to go down the drain because Cardinal Witch suddenly decided to obliterate the church as if he was tearing a loaf of bread? Which, do not worry. I will order those men to halt the destruction immediately, William II declared, stomping towards the men. Stay here, witch. Do not let yourself be seen. When he approached the men, he dramatically whipped his blue mantle, making his kingly presence known. Since this day had started with a simple venture through the forest alongside the witch, he was not dressed in his usual heavy gold robes. Instead, a lightweight blue mantle hung around his shoulders and a leather surcoat was wrapped around his torso. However, his vest had the royal Stevenson family's crest embellished upon it, shining proud enough so men from all around the world knew who he was. The nearby knights bowed down to the king when he approached, cowering as they noticed the fury in his eyes. The 5 knights that circled him whistled to the working peasant men, signaling to them that their king had arrived. Explain to me, you foolish men. Why in God's name are you destroying the church? My church? King William II thundered. Once the entire group halted their work and kneeled to their king. As they did this, William II scanned the area for Cardinal Witch, who was conveniently absent. That old rag has eons of explaining to do. Sir Petur Iohan VI was the first knight to speak up. Why, your majesty? We understand your fury. We truly do. He exclaimed in his anxious and chirpy voice that irritated the king to no ends. Cardinal Witch told us that he received your majesty's approval. That damn cardinal told me not about this. William II roared, swinging his fist in the air. The golden crown that adorned his head almost fell off because of his rage, but he quickly grabbed it on time. Sir Petur Iohan VI nodded timidly, after jumping up with surprise at the king's ear-deafening screeches. Why, your majesty? We are deeply sorry. Cardinal Witch told us to do this, so we had no choice but to oblige. Then bring the damn cardinal here. King William II yelled, clutching the gold cord that hung from his surcoat angrily. As he twisted the cord, he imagined the cardinal's foppish face smashed in between his thumbs. Twisting the golden cord eased him at times, and relieved the murderous thoughts that ran through his head when the cardinal played games behind his back. Of course, your majesty, Count Terowan Rodolphus said, rushing to find the cardinal. When the count arrived with the cardinal, King William II gritted his teeth and forced a smile. He learned early on during his reign that one must always be on the good side of the cardinal, for he is soon to be God's messenger or whatever crap he came up with. Your majesty, Cardinal Witch said, flashing him a lopsided grin. To what may I owe the pleasure of thy company? He asked, blinking with feigned innocence. His hands were safely clasped underneath his fringed white fascia, which was girded with a red pellegrina. His white cassock draped over his feet, gliding against the grass in swift movements as he approached the king knowingly. Cardinal Witch King William began, swallowing the distaste in his throat. I have so pleasantly heard that you, of all people, orchestrated the deterioration of the divine church of Willesden. May I so dearly ask, why have you not consulted myself, the king, about this action? He questioned, suppressing the fire that burned in his heart. The cardinal nodded, his leathery lips forming a firm line on his sagging face. Ah yes. It seems I have forgotten to inform thou about this. I give thou my deepest apologies, he began, bowing as far as his hunched back would allow him.
No worries, Cardinal.
William II exclaimed, a choked chuckle forcing its way out of his throat. That old rag shall be punished. After sharing a hearty laugh, that was sardonic on both ends, the cardinal continued his explanation. I have recently learned that my great-great-great-grandfather, Cardinal Witch, died in the year 1246, due to incredibly dire circumstances. Satanic activities, the books say. This information astounded me so greatly, that I have decided to obliterate my church, he proclaimed, his gray eyes wide with seriousness. I have even heard that your Majesty's father's brother, King Willesden I, has also died because of these circumstances. It would be wise not to halt this obliteration, your Majesty, for we Christians cannot risk satanic activity to occur at our church. It is all the witches' doing, I say. King William II sighed. The cardinal was correct about something for once. There had been rumors circling about a group of witches performing satanic activities at their church. He had known this for a long time, although he knew the truth behind it. His late father and the witch were the ones who began it. The present king dismissed the rumors publicly, hoping that they would soon forget about it so he could perform his special task discreetly. Although with the church already partly destroyed, there seemed to be no hope for his special task. Without the promise of the church, he could not play out his part of the story. The story ignited a part of his soul that he kept locked when conversing with the outside people. However, in the solitude of the castle basement, where the witch lives in secret, his soul would roam free every time she told him the story from that black book. He was free to ask the witch any query that entered his mind, free to listen to the magical story an endless number of times, free to ponder about what he planned to do with the witch's gift, and free to yearn for the day he turned 100 years old, the day that would change his special life forever. What do you plan to do with this holy land, once the destruction is finished? The king asked, all hope drained from his eyes. Your Majesty, this land is not holy anymore. It has been tainted by Satan and his witches. Despite that, we plan to build a school upon its place. It is an extremely humane deed, I know. No need to congratulate my intelligence. We plan to educate young children because God will not forgive us if we do not turn this dire situation into something helpful. The cardinal gloated, a mischievous grin plastered on his wrinkled face. King William groggily nodded, having no choice but to cave into the cardinal's demands. Fine. Do what you please with the church, for I cannot halt your plan. The king, who appeared to be 20 years old, sulked. After this, William II grudgingly returned to the witch, who hid behind the trees across from the church. He relayed the news to her. His once optimistic emotions about his special task vanished. How shall we go about this, witch? He asked with pursed lips. The witch pondered for a moment before an idea flickered in her head. William Stevenson, too. She hesitantly began, her violet eyes slowly lighting up. The school is our answer. You shall continue your duties like I always told you, except this time, instead of leading your marked people to the church, lead them to the school. She excitedly proposed. You are right, witch. He exclaimed as his features lit up at the new prospect. But what about your end goal of tormenting the church? Targeting the school will not stop the ongoing inquisition, he validly pointed out, as they walked towards the castle. The witch sighed and shook her head while her tight bun loosened. I shall find other ways of getting my message across. Even if I wanted to, I cannot erase the curse I bestowed upon your family. You and I are slaves to this curse, William Stevenson too. There is no choice but to continue, she said, placing a palm on his cheek. I suggest you help those men build the school, which will increase the speed of the construction. You must do what you have to do to receive an heir, understand? William II nodded, as the witch traced her skeletal fingers over his pale cheek. She flashed him a timid smile, her hollow face inverting ghoulishly to create that gesture. Good. Today is the day, William Stevenson too. In 6 hours, the first half of your lifelong mission shall begin. Once you find out who your marked people are, you shall lead them to the school and kill them, just as your father did, she proclaimed as fireworks resumed their erupting within the king's veins. It always amused him, this lifelong specialness he held. After all, having a witch mother made for quite an interesting life. It also burdened him. He was the only heir of King William Stevenson I, who died the day he was born. That fact always astounded him and caused his heart to burn with fiery rage. If God was so great, why would he take a father away from his son? Later, he would come to learn the truth about his father's death. He was special too because of the devil and his curse, not God. Nevertheless, he wondered what his father was like. He knew that he and his father looked exactly alike, from the grand portraits that hung around the castle. As much as he begged to hear more, the witch rarely talked about him, aside from a few occasional mentions during the story she told. William II grabbed those occasional mentions and created an image in his head of what his king father was like. In the young boy's mind, King William Stevenson was adventurous and playful like his son, although when it came to his royal duties, he was extremely dedicated, something his son strived to achieve. He disliked the church and specifically the cardinal like his son. He enjoyed staring at the fresco paintings that danced around the ceiling of the throne room, like his son. The golden crown he always wore on his head complemented his brownish hair, a crown that his son has worn since he was 20. The only person he truly knew was his witch mother. From a young age, all his mother would talk about was how special he was. How the start of his special duty would begin when he turned 100 years old. How does one live up to 100, mother? The young prince would ask, looking up at his witch mother. During nights like this, the prince would go down to the castle basement and wish his mother a good night's rest. Before he would leave to return to his chambers, the witch would tell him the bedtime story. It was already explained in the story, Prince William Stevenson too. Have you not been paying attention? She would reply in a stern but motherly voice. She used to be like that a lot when he was a child, unafraid to show her soft side towards her young son. As he grew older and talked with his mother fewer times, that softness washed away with the wind, only to return when she had to raise another Stevenson boy. I have been paying attention, mother. I have, the little prince exclaimed, his doe-green eyes enthralled with the ragged sketches within the black book. But I do not understand, for I have not been paying attention during my schooling these days. His mother sighed and picked the boy from the ground. She propped him on her lap and hugged him from behind, her motherly embrace warming the soon-to-be king's heart. She flipped the black book to the first page once more and retold the story. Once upon a time in a kingdom very near and dear, lived an evil king and an innocent witch. One day, this innocent witch wandered into the church of this kingdom. It was an impulse that no one could explain. Nevertheless, she approached the king and his cardinal, who began mocking and laughing at the poor witch. This woman looks like she emerged from the suburbs and bathed herself in the dirt. It is comical to me how such lowly life like her aimlessly enters this church with not an ounce of intelligence. The cardinal bantered. Thou art correct, cardinal. She is hideous. She looks like a witch. The king joined in, pointing at the witch who had not said a word. I am a pagan witch, she finally responded, in a raspy voice that was suitable for summoning the devil. The men cowered with fear at those words, and immediately backed away. But it was for naught, for the witch had already cursed the king's family. They shall never bear a child again, so there shall be no heir for the throne. Without an heir, the royal family would be abolished. When the king's brother learned of this, he struck a deal with the witch. He said, I promise to give you eons of rich lands, multiple enormous bags filled with gold coins, and a wonderful room in the dazzling castle for you to live in. In return, all you have to do is undo this inconvenient curse upon my family. That is all I ask, my lady. I am a pagan witch, there is no undoing my curse. However, I can create a second curse to give you the object of your desire, an heir. Although, do understand that there are special consequences to this curse, she wistfully said. And so they went off to the castle, where the king's brother gifted the witch with all their riches. Once she had been dressed in an elaborate gown and fed well, they went to the library to seal the devil's pact. The king's brother was then granted an extra millennium of life. She split her soul and gifted him her pagan powers every 100 years, so he could fulfill his special task of creating satanic activities to occur at the church. When he succeeded, he was gifted a son. He died after spending one day with his son, and that son is destined to continue the cycle thereafter. The witch finished, shutting the book. You are the special son, Prince William Stevenson too. It is your turn to continue the cycle, she said, wiping the drool that dribbled from the boy's mouth. I cannot wait. The young boy cheered. What in God's name do you mean? King William II roared, unable to contain the fury that raked his flaring green eyes. This must be a comical trickery, Cardinal. You cannot simply abolish the royal family like it is merely a loaf of bread that can be ripped apart. He yelled, clenching his fists. The Cardinal sighed and looked down at his feet. It saddens me too, Your Majesty. However, thou must understand that this is what the people want. This new form of military government has already taken over the Americas, and the Stevenson family simply cannot uphold. Damn you! He shouted, tossing the crown that sat upon his head. What a terrible day this has been, Cardinal Witched 9. This is all your fault. First you obliterate the church. Now you have the nerve to abolish the royal family. He screamed, slashing his fist against the air. Your Majesty, there is no royal family. It is just thee. Since thou have failed to receive an heir in 2 decades, the people are growing angsty. They want to be assured that the royal family isn't on the brink of falling apart. However, quite frankly, it already has. The Cardinal exclaimed, looking up at the king with probing eyes. William II gritted his teeth, smoldering underneath his furious expression. It is not my fault you have been alive for more than 2 decades. Everything is your fault, Cardinal. He roared, making no sense to the Cardinal. It had always angered him that the Cardinal had more power than he did, but this was unacceptable. Since it seems that I am not king anymore, I have no obligation to please the damn self-proclaimed saint. He angrily thought, storming away in a fit of rage. Before stopping dead in his tracks when the Cardinal announced this, he and the Cardinal were simply walking through the royal courtyard, discussing the witch purges that were increasing day by day. The king longed to go back 3 minutes ago to savor the excitement in the air before the first half of his lifelong journey commenced in 1 hour. He forced himself to cool his temper, but it proved difficult with the Cardinal staring daggers at his back, a couple of acres away. William II glowered at the Cardinal, who hastily turned around to attend to more compelling matters. William II sighed as he clutched the golden cord that hung from his surcoat, uncertain of what to do next. Although what the Cardinal proposed was logical, it still infuriated William II. Thankfully, this proposition did not interfere with his special duty as it did with the church. However, without the promise of the royal family, having an heir would lose its meaning. After his internal contemplation, he looked up and realized that during his blind rage, he had wandered past the royal courtyard and towards a vast area of nothingness. He stood in the middle of a grassy field that was friendly in the day but ominously dark during midnight. The moon's silvery rays could not penetrate through the utterly black sky, so he could barely see. No sign of life to be found anywhere, except for a few stray tree trunks that spiked to the sky in a man-made setup. His senses were sensitized. The loam in the earth and the decomposing leaves made the atmosphere clingy and thick. The blackness nurtured a sense of claustrophobia inside him even though the plain land stretched unbroken for miles. William II squinted in the darkness, peering up at the man-made spikes. He noticed a figure hanging on them, in the same position as Jesus when sacrificing himself on the cross, except this figure had their hands tied to their back. You and I are slaves to this curse, William Stevenson too. There is no choice but to continue, the witch said, interjecting his thoughts. William II jumped up with surprise and turned around, shocked to see the witch suddenly appearing behind him. Witch, what are you doing here? He asked, rubbing his eyes to see his mother. The witch's shadowed face smirked, as she took light steps forward. It is time, William Stevenson too. Time for the first half of your lifelong mission to commence. Time for you to be gifted with my pagan powers, she whispered, raising her right hand. Do not let the deterioration of the curse or the abolishment of your royalty disparage you. You are special, William Stevenson too. Oh, of course, witch, he said, bobbing his head excitedly. Every fiber of his being was giddy with excitement and anticipation. His somber emotions about being dethroned and outcast gradually faded away, as his larger-than-life mission was finally happening. However, before we proceed, there is something I must show you, she said, snapping her fingers. To William's astonishment, a strange blazing flame pulsed from her fingertips. William watched with wide and excited eyes as the flame flickered amongst the dark shadows of the plain field. The colors changed from amber to ruby, and then back to gold in a repetitive pattern. It lit up the room that had been partially visible and blinded his eyes, like a fiery hearth. His eyes followed the flickering flame, as the witch raised her arm to light the entire field. "Incredible, witch!" he exclaimed. His anger from before completely vanished. Suddenly, his breath got caught in his throat as she pointed the flame towards the man-made spikes. They were not simply spikes, they were wooden gallows. The nearest gallows had a ligature tied around a woman's neck, a sight William II was not expecting. Her body stood straight up on the spike, with a harsh rope burrowed with insects tied around her leg. Her dark hair covered the features of her hanging head, and it was clear by the blood splattered on her peasant gown that she was deceased. William II froze in his spot as his stomach heaved and his nostrils filled with the smell of rotting meat. Without eyelids, the lifeless eyes stared down at the dark ground while her lipless mouth hung open. Her hands were behind her back, not tied with a rope but instead pinned to the gallows with nails. He instinctively rubbed his hands together, imagining how it would feel to have his palms hammered to wood. The skin on her arms had also been peeled back and pinned with iron nails, banged in with a hammer. Her ribcage had been pried open and the whiteness of the bone shone out amongst the sea of flesh. Her blood-splattered gown did a terrible job of concealing it. The hanging face was the milky color of a cadaver, and William wondered how much of the procedure the woman had lived through. There were rope burns on the wrists and ankles, but the mouth wasn't gagged. Mayhaps the torturer enjoyed the screams. William was unable to form words at the gruesome sight. The witch did not utter a word either, to avoid rupturing the deadly atmosphere. She silently waved her palm and the sparkling ember multiplied, lighting up the area past them. One by one, as the new flames formed, more gallows could be seen, all occupied with hanging women who had been neglected once dead. "What do you think of this, William Stevenson too? Do you know who they are?" She finally spoke, turning to look at her son. William II sputtered with his words for a moment, his mind completely blank as he could not avert his eyes from the sight. "I do not know," he breathed, his eyes skittishly dodging from one gallows to the next. As much as he wanted to look away, there was no empty spot. Only gallows after gallows, dead women after dead women, staring back at him with their souls dancing around the air with unrestfulness. They have not died in peace, that much was incredibly clear. "My sisters," she raspily answered, her mouth nearing William's ears. Her frigid breath landed on his neck and sent shivers down his spine, and he gulped nervously. "My pagan sisters. Those men, those witch hunter men, have tortured and hung them. This is the result of the Inquisition. And for what?" she questioned, curling her skeletal fingers around William's quivering wrist. "William Stevenson too," she began, clenching her right palm and killing the only light source. "It is because they think my sisters are witches," she said, as the lights died in unison, and the horrifying gallows could not be seen anymore. William II stood paralyzed in his spot, as the witch circled him with menacing grace. "Fulfill your task successfully, and you shall receive a son. The 6 marked people include Cardinal Witchednine and some other well-known witch hunters," she said, inching her face to his as her voice grew louder. "I savor the screams of every witch hunter, for I never forget the screams of my sisters." Her violet eyes suddenly flashed, and William II staggered backwards at the sudden light. "Kill him. Kill them all. Kill all the witch hunters, William Stevenson too. For that is the only meaning to your cursed life." 100 years had passed since the first half of his lifelong mission. Today marked his 200-year birthday, and William Stevenson too successfully completed his special duty. His distaste towards the fact that he had been stripped of his titles 100 years ago died down, as the modern times approached after the destruction of the Dark Ages. Plus, they call him Sir William Stevenson too now, which he found more suitable. He greatly anticipated the day he shall receive his son, and now it had arrived. Finally, he was in the midst of the chapter of the story he always wanted to complete. It didn't matter to him anymore about having an heir for the long-lost monarchy. He just wanted a son that he shall protect to the very last vestige of his power. He will stand before his son should danger come his way, beside him when he finds his footing, and only behind when he is ready to be a man and continue the cycle. Though his bones will age and he knows his fate because of that story, William's love will be eternal. He hopes the young boy will never feel as if he had to earn his love or prove himself worthy because he already is, the moment he will be in his arms for the first time. William II waited restlessly, in the main hall of the school building. He had begun teaching here after he found out that his second group of marked people were students who attended the school. Their fathers were witch hunters, and it seemed the devil and the witch wanted to torment them psychologically. It was the easiest way to get to the innocent children and kill them with his gifted pagan powers. Willesden High School it was named. The Victorian-style building was extremely large with dusty gray bricks and tinted windows. Gnarled trees hung low over the towers, creaking ominously in the howling winds. The heavy oak doors swung in front of him, as the wind pushed them back and forth. The moonlight shone through the cracked windows, casting an eerie glow onto every classroom. Thick cobwebs hung on the ceilings and his footsteps sounded deafening on the cold stone floor. There was a spiky black gate at the entrance, and barely any living plants grew on the ground surrounding it. Tall towers were placed at every corner, but no student was permitted to go inside the towers after suspicious satanic activities began occurring there. Finally, the witch arrived with a squalling baby that was hidden behind her back. Her black gown swished against the varnished floor as she approached William II with bulging eyes and a weary smile spread across her ageless face. "William Stevenson too," she said, her husky voice bouncing off the walls of the school. "It has been many years since I last saw you. Now it is time for your reward," she said, passing their son to the giddy father. Tears dripped down William's cheeks as he gazed at the divine spark kindled in his newborn son's eyes. He cradled the squalling and red-faced baby, humming him a lullaby. "Oh, my dearest son," he sniffled, as his son's lashes swept up to blink at him. "He has woken. My infinity son has woken. The one with the power to hold the divine key," William exclaimed, his heart surging with a firework of emotions. He raised his son to the ceiling, where the now absent fresco paintings used to look down upon them, 200 years ago. "What do you plan to name him?" the witch asked, her hands clasped behind her back as she cast a solemn gaze at the ground. "Why, I have been thinking about this for decades. Wilfred I, he shall be named," William II exclaimed, cuddling his cursed son. As he brought the giggling baby to his shoulder, he noticed the flicker of sadness within the witch's eyes. "Witch," he said, wrapping his hand around her slender waist, "I do not mind dying tomorrow. For you have given me the greatest gift of all one day with my prodigal son. I know that after I have entered heaven, Wilfred will be in good hands, just like I was in good hands with you," he said, smiling softly. The witch gazed up at William Stevenson too, her violet eyes raked with smugness. A tiny chuckle poured out of her raspy throat, which caused uneasiness to stir the still atmosphere. It was at that moment William Stevenson too noticed the black rose poking from in between her skeletal fingers. "You are not going to heaven, William Stevenson too." 33 Wilfred Stevenson was different from his father and grandfather. He lived in the darkness for most of his life, accompanied by his witch mother. He and the witch were both outcasts, so they traveled to the dark forest. They moved out of the castle when he was a young boy, for his father had died with his titles stripped from him, and there was no need for an heir. No one knew he was royalty, and no one shall know for the rest of his time. Wilfred knew he was different from the others that inhabited the villages. He was partially immortal and would live longer than most, but not as long as the witch. For a time he felt worthless and without purpose. So he asked the witch if there was anything he could do instead of playing with the sticks and dirt. She answered by reading a story from a black book, and telling her son that he had a special duty to fulfill when he turned 100 years old. In the meantime, when he turned 20, the age when he stopped aging, he taught at Willesden High School, which had been built by his father 200 years ago. He continued to teach there for 100 years, and would for 100 more. This special duty assigned from birth gave him a purpose in life. And today was the day, the first half of his lifelong mission. So he had patiently awaited the witch, in the school library where the pact was first sealed. He waited to receive half of the witch's powers, to torment his marked people for the rest of the year. And it happened. Wilfred watched as the witch sauntered away, having just given half of her pagan powers to him. He stood with his hands clasped together and a sinister grin spread across his face. Now it is finally time, he thought, walking towards his classroom. When he entered room 110, he swiftly sat in the teacher's desk at the front of the classroom. He folded his hands neatly and patiently waited for his students to arrive. His marked students specifically. During the incantation the witch had done to gift her powers, he learned who his 6 marked people were. They were all children of local witch hunters, and it seemed the witch had specifically requested this of the devil because the death of a child does torment a parent greatly. Finally, the secondary students of Willesden arrived and obediently sat in their seats. He eyed his 6 students, some girls and some boys. Which one shall I torment and kill first? He deviously wondered, biting his lips to suppress the smirk that was forming. As he wondered, he began teaching the class. Good morning, folks. For those of you who do not know, my name is Mr. Stevenson. Welcome to homeroom. I want to start by clarifying a few school rules and classroom protocols. Wilfred began, standing up and leaning against the front of his desk modestly. You folks are now in your 11th year. You are fully capable adults and I want to treat you like ones. For that to happen, we must respect each other, he said, crossing his arms as he scrutinized the 6 students at the front of the classroom. They were not physically marked yet, but when he began tormenting them, they would be. Before Wilfred could continue his lecture, a man burst through the doors. He was a burly man, with overalls and suspenders that clung against his fat belly with every wobbly step he took. The students exchanged confused looks with their teacher, baffled by this sudden entrance. May I ask you, the old man who thought it clever to randomly walk into my classroom, what is your purpose here? Wilfred asked, receiving a couple of discreet sniggers from his students. Wilfred playfully winked at them. They love me, he arrogantly snickered to himself. The man heaved heavily as he scanned the classroom, raising his farming axe in the air. The children cowered in fear as the man walked towards the front desks. Wilfred rushed and grabbed his wrist, to stop the lunatic from injuring his precious marked students. What the hell? Wilfred shouted, punching the man in the ribs. If you do not leave at once, I will inform the headmaster of your unpermitted entrance. The man pointed his axe towards the student in the far right of the front row, next to the cracked window. She. The man snapped as his chest heaved with fury. My daughter is a witch. He shouted with his southern accent and waved the axe dangerously in the air. The students in the classroom gasped at this revelation and instantly started pointing and shouting at the girl. The girl bit her lip and furiously shook her head, desperate to defend herself. This is not true, father. I told you this morning that I have not been marked by Satan. She cried and stood up from her desk. Why must you accuse me of this in front of my classmates? Wilfred stared with wide eyes, although he knew the truth of the matter. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to face the man. What do you plan to do, sir? He asked, tightening his grip around his wrist. The man snorted and raised his axe in the air. His arms were stronger than Wilfred's, and he easily broke free from the teacher's grip. Kill her, of course. It does not matter if she is my daughter, for she is a witch and I am a witch hunter, he answered boisterously. Wilfred clenched his jaw, swiftly thinking of what to do. I cannot allow him to kill her. She is my kill. He swallowed the lump in his throat before coming up with a witty solution. I see, he murmured, walking towards the girl who was accused of being a witch. Wilfred gripped the girl's long auburn hair and tilted her face so her terrified eyes met his. I shall deal with her myself, as she is my student now, sir. The students quietly cheered for their teacher, excited and relieved that he would be dealing with their witch classmate. Her father, on the other hand, was not so amused. I will not allow you to handle my witch daughter, for she is mine, as much as it disgusts me to say. The man bellowed. I will lose my pride as a witch hunter if I do not kill her myself. Wilfred chuckled and walked past the man, dragging his student by her hair. You are nothing but a mere human. There is little you can do, he muttered under his breath, shutting the door behind them and locking it. Once they were alone in the hallway, Wilfred let go of the girl's hair. She faltered and staggered backwards, wiping the tears that streamed down her face. Mr. Stevenson, the frail girl cried, jumping up to hug him. I understand now. You were taking me away from my father before he killed me. Thank you, she exclaimed in her southern accent, crying into his shoulders. Wilfred grimaced and pulled the girl off him, flashing her a forced smile. Of course, Matilda Fitzgerald, he said, warily patting her head. Now tell me, why exactly does your father think of you as a witch? Matilda pursed her lips and sulked. I have a mole on my back, and when my father saw it this morning, he claimed it was Satan's mark. I suppose this happens often when your father is a witch hunter. He captures and kills witches daily so he can spot one from a mile away, she explained, sniffling. Wilfred clicked his tongue and nodded. Matilda, your father is correct. You are marked, he bluntly said. Matilda furrowed her eyebrows. I do not understand what you mean, Mr. Stevenson, she said, before widening her eyes with surprise. Oh no, Mr. Stevenson, don't tell me you think I am a witch too, she questioned, feeble tears brimming her eyes. No, no, Wilfred cunningly said, shaking his head. You are not a witch, but you are marked all the same. Hm. Matilda Fitzgerald obliviously whimpered, looking up at him with her doe eyes. Before she could question any further, Wilfred raised his right arm and balled his fist in the direction of Matilda. He unclenched his fist and an inky shadow spurted from his right palm. The dark mist poured onto the ground, like a shower of ominously delicate petals raining down. It was a slow process, but it still caused Matilda Fitzgerald to recoil with fear at the shocking magic she was witnessing. Matilda watched with horrid eyes as the inky shadow rose from a puddle into the shape of a man that resembled her father. So she fears her father. Wilfred waved his hands and the shadow lunged forward as if he was a puppet master pulling the strings. The shadow that was in the shape of her father wrapped his stubby hands around her neck and strangled her. Desperate chokes forced up her throat, but the shadow managed to muffle her cries. The shadow levitated from the ground and spread its dark mist around the gray hallways of Willesden, while Matilda dropped to her knees. Mr. Stevenson. She managed to sputter after taking in sharp breaths of air. W.I. Wilfred smirked at Matilda, with no remorse at all. He watched as she struggled to stay alive and as the shadow ripped her hair off her head. This betrayal by her teacher was the first, but would not be the last. Deafening screams escaped Matilda, but Wilfred simply snapped his fingers and the shadow swiftly snapped her neck in half at his command. Problem solved. After a moment, her eyes were devoid of life. Wilfred chortled at the sight of his first marked student collapsed on the floor and her snapped neck. He bent forward and overturned her right palm. The devil's mark had been imprinted on her palm, as per the pact. So it truly works. How amusing. Wilfred Stevenson was different indeed. Wilfred Stevenson bolted through the grim hallways of the school. He taught at and wheezed as his burning lungs gasped for air. His feet slipped outwards on the polished floor as he rounded the corner. The howling wind shot through the cracked windows, causing the classroom doors around to open and shut ferociously. His heart hammered frantically as he scanned the empty hallways for light, although most of the candles had been blown out. Rain splattered across the cracked windows and some found their way inside the school, while the thunder roared outside. Tears blinded him as he ran as swiftly as his stout legs could carry him. He quickened his pace to a desperate sprint, almost slipping on the puddles of rain that lay on the gray floorboards. The pounding noise of his dress shoes resonated off the walls of the school with a clanging echo that matched the thick anxiousness and fear he felt as he ran. His breathing hitched in his throat as he forced his legs to lunge forward. In his arms, the baby he received yesterday was cradled in his arms. It was a splendid day yesterday. He spent the entire day with his son that he waited 200 years for. He quickly figured out his favorite toys and food in a matter of hours. At one point he sang him lullabies that put the newborn to sleep. He even thought of a name. Wilson Stevenson too, he shall be called. Wilfred hiccuped as his tears blended in with the downpour, and his heart yanked in and out of his chest with anguish. He wanted to desperately spend more time with his son because he knew how it felt to grow up without a father. He wanted to watch him crawl, speak, and walk. He wanted to play ball with him and watch him go to school. He wanted to see him grow from a boy into a man, and proudly pat him on the back. Wilfred's lower lip quivered as his thumping heart was pumped with the adrenaline of desperation. If he was successful with his request, then perhaps there could be a chance. He pushed the heavy doors and rushed out of Willesden High School, the squalling newborn squirming underneath his desperate grip. "Oh, my beloved son. Hold on for a little longer," he shouted, but the pouring rain drowned out his yells and the baby's cries. The icy gray sky poured rain down over the school courtyard with a roar. The sound of emptiness was disrupted by the loud gregarious boom of thunder in the distance. The cold icy rain pierced his pale and wet skin and he ran across the slippery path, his posture weakened by the weight of his soaked clothes. His gray tuxedo flapped in the howling wind as he ran and his disheveled brownish hair matted around his face, although he did not care one bit. Wilfred did the best he could to cover the wailing baby with the black shawl to avoid him falling ill. Wilfred urgently looked up, and in the distance, he saw the witch approaching. The witch's right arm was raised in the air, preparing to kill Wilfred as per the pact. They intersected in the middle of the courtyard as the rain continued to hammer down on them. Wilfred hesitated for a moment to catch his breath, staring intently at her violet eyes. Her eyes were cast with darkness and mischief, and they both knew what she called them here for. Today was his final day. "Your last words, Wilfred Stevenson?" she asked nonchalantly. "Which, there is something urgent I must ask of you," Wilfred exclaimed, stroking his hands on his son's chubby cheeks to soothe him. He squinted through the downpour to catch the witch's expression, praying that she would not kill him just yet. The witch arched her eyebrow and lowered her raised hand. "I suppose I can answer whatever question you desire since today is your death day," she tentatively replied. "Although, please do not prolong this, Wilfred Stevenson." Tears brimmed Wilfred's eyes as he brought Wilson close to his chest. "That is the thing, witch. Please spare me another day with my son," he desperately requested. The witch narrowed her violet eyes and gritted her teeth. "What?" she hissed, inching closer towards Wilfred. "Do you not realize it is part of the pact for you to die at 200 years old?" Wilfred sulkily nodded and stared longingly at his son before responding.
I do realize.
"But one day with my son is not enough for me. Trust me, witch, I knew my death would happen today and I never would have imagined requesting this. I had known since the moment you finished reading me that story for the first time. Yet, now that the day has finally come for me to hand my beloved son over to you, I cannot bring myself to let go of him. I know this is cowardly of me to request, but I must. There must be a chance. Please, witch, there has to be something you can do." "No. I am not a fairy that shall grant you any wish you desire, Wilfred Stevenson. I am a pagan witch and I am marked by the devil. There is no swaying the devil," she bellowed, clenching her fists. Her violet eyes glowed amidst the gray fog that swirled around them, and they were bulging with fury. "Please. You are my mother and now the mother of my child. I have never asked anything of you until now, just grant me this one wish," he cried, refusing to back down. Her violet eyes softened at the mention of him calling her his mother. No Stevenson had called her that before. She bit her lips and thought deeply. "I shall ask the devil." She sighed and shut her eyes tightly. Wilfred nodded earnestly, the rain drenching his hopelessness away. "Oh!" she suddenly exclaimed as her eyes shot open. Her entire body had abruptly frozen and her eyes darted from left to right as if she was reading something within her mind. Or perhaps it was the wind whispering words in her ears. What is it?" Wilfred hesitantly asked, rubbing his son's back. His heart slowed down to a normal pace as he managed to regain his composure during this time of quiet. "I suppose I can grant you one more day," she whispered, to which Wilfred's features lit up. "It seems that if we read in between the lines, the devil said you must die at 200. No word as to the exact time. For example, I killed William Stevenson the day he received the baby, in the year 1346. However, I later felt remorse for it, so I granted his son, your father, one full day with his child. I was planning the same for you." She trailed off, gulping nervously. Wilfred's grin stretched from ear to ear, as tears of mirth streamed down his face. "So you can grant me an extra day with my son. Please allow it, witch. I will be eternally grateful for you. Kill me tomorrow, it does not matter to me." he exclaimed as his green eyes glazed with tears. "I simply want to spend more time with my son." The witch nodded and scratched the mark on her right palm. "I suppose the devil will allow it, Wilfred Stevenson. Although, keep in mind one thing. Asking the devil for more never ends well," she ominously said. "He will tell karma to give your family what they deserve one way or another." Wilfred Stevenson did not hear her last words. Instead, he raised the baby to the sky as heaven's tears poured down on his prodigal son. "My son. Oh, my loving son. I am eager to spend another day with you," he exclaimed, weeping with joy. The witch sighed and gazed at the father and son with an unreadable expression. "Wilfred Stevenson, you are different from your father and grandfather. Therefore, your son, Wilson Stevenson too, will be different too. There surely will be consequences for that, I hope you know."